Usually when we think about a country's security, we picture a map. You look at that map and you see a thick red line drawn around the borders. And the logic is, well, it's incredibly simple. The danger is out there and the safety is in here.
Right.
It's binary.
Right.
You build a wall, you patrol the water, and you keep the bad stuff out.
Yeah, it's a very comforting illusion. We're kind of wired to understand geography like that.
Yeah.
We want threats to be physical, things we can categorize into, us and them operating in clearly defined physical spaces.
But the moment you actually look at the reality
Yeah.
of modern globalized national security, that beautiful, simple map just completely falls apart.
Oh, absolutely.
The ink bleeds everywhere. You realize the defensive landscape isn't a line in the sand. It's a murky, overlapping, borderline chaotic environment. And today, we're going to untangle that.
Yeah.
We're taking a deep dive into a massive stack of intelligence to figure out how a middle power like Australia actually defends itself when borders effectively no longer exist.
Yeah.
We are pulling from gritty Sydney police wiretaps, leaked notes from a Five Eyes intelligence summit, the internal rulebooks of federal policing, and even nuclear submarine blueprints. We want to understand how you project influence and protect citizens in a world where a threat can be a guy with a gun or, an algorithm running on a server halfway across the planet.
Yeah, and just a quick caveat as we dive into this, because I want to be upfront with everyone about the nature of these sources.
Yeah, good call.
The documents we are unpacking today, they touch on some incredibly heated political nerves.
Very much so.
They deal with the domestic resurgence of the anti-immigration One Nation Party. They touch on Donald Trump's Board of Peace in the Middle East. And they heavily involve the intense geopolitical friction we are seeing with China and Russia. So to be completely clear here, we are not taking a stance on any of those political movements or foreign policies today.
Right.
Our job here is strictly to act as mechanics. We're pulling apart the raw data provided in these sources to understand how the geopolitical machine is currently operating without endorsing the political actors pulling the levers.
I think that's vital context to keep in mind. Our mission is to connect the dots. We're going to draw a line from street-level motorcycle gangs operating out of Sydney, trace that through global artificial intelligence algorithms and federal human rights watchdogs, and follow it all the way up to international treaties involving nuclear-powered submarines.
It's quite a journey.
It is. And I want to start at the absolute physical end of the line, the gritty reality of law enforcement. Let's look at some criminals who genuinely believe they had beaten this borderless system. We have this fascinating transcript from the New South Wales Police Force.
Yeah, this one is wild.
It really is.
Yeah.
It details the culmination of a massive 8-year investigation called Strikeforce Millstream.
And this operation is a perfect case study for the evaporation of borders. Strikeforce Millstream was initiated way back in December of 2013. The target was a highly sophisticated, organized crime syndicate with direct ties to the Lone Wolf motorcycle outlaw gang.
Wow.
And the sheer scale of their operation is, well, it's difficult to wrap your head around.
The numbers are staggering. Over this 8-year period, this one syndicate was allegedly responsible for laundering $55 million in cash.
Yeah.
And when you look at the narcotics, they interdicted 2 tons of MDMA and over 900 kilos of methamphetamine.
Unbelievable.
In total, the police anticipate this specific group brought more than 7 tons of illicit drugs into Australia.
I really want you to think about the logistics required for that.
Right.
Moving 7 tons of contraband across international waters and through customs while simultaneously cleaning $55 million in dirty cash, that requires an industrial-scale corporate apparatus.
That's now.
This isn't a few guys in a garage.
Yeah.
Right? This is a multinational illicit logistics company. And for a very long time, the alleged key figures at the top of this pyramid thought they were completely untouchable.
Because they use the old map logic.
Exactly.
The transcript details the extradition of 2 men, aged 36 and 38, and they were pulled straight out of Dubai. These guys basically set up shop in the United Arab Emirates because they thought it was an impenetrable fortress.
Right, out of jurisdiction.
Exactly. They figured Dubai was a luxury safe haven where Australian warrants held 0 weight. They were living this opulent, high society lifestyle, assuming they were entirely out of reach of the detectives back in New South Wales. But modern policing has shrunk the globe.
They really have.
You can't just cross the line on a map, check into a luxury penthouse, and disappear anymore. They were eventually tracked down, thrown into central Dubai jail, and then flown back to Sydney, surrounded by a specialist security detail to face 155 charges.
And the transcript from the authorities highlights a profound shift in global law enforcement dynamics here. The police explicitly state on the record, quote, "Once upon a time, we didn't have the reach."
Wow.
They actually admit there was a period where a criminal crossing that border meant game over for the investigation. But now, they say they have the reach and support of governments like Dubai.
That's huge.
That represents a monumental structural change in international relations. The safe havens for transnational organized crime are rapidly shrinking, and it's not because of better birds or planes. It's because of unprecedented governmental cooperation.
But wait, how do they actually get the tip-off in the first place?
Yeah.
It's not like a beat cop in Sydney just randomly gets a hunch and buys a ticket to the UAE, right?
Right.
It is the technology that enables this reach. If we connect this local police bust to our next source, which is a Straits Times report from August 26, 2026, we start to see the massive, invisible architecture making these busts possible. This report covers a recent meeting of the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance right there in Sydney.
Yeah, and for context, the Five Eyes is arguably the most powerful intelligence-sharing grouping on the planet, made up of the UK, the US, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. Historically, if you read about the Five Eyes, they were focused on classic Cold War spycraft.
Right. Tracking Soviet submarines.
Exactly. Tracking subs, intercepting state-level diplomatic cables. But what is highly notable about this 2026 summit is that traditional state-on-state espionage kind of took a back seat.
The agenda, according to Australian Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke, was squarely focused on artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
They weren't just debating theoretical AI ethics. They were explicitly sharing strategies on how to weaponize AI to combat terrorism, drug smuggling, scam centers, and, transnational organized crime, like our friends at Dubai.
We have to understand why AI is no longer just a Silicon Valley buzzword, but a fundamental structural requirement for a group like the Five Eyes.
Okay, unpack that.
Go back to that $55 million laundered by the Strikeforce Millstream syndicate.
Right.
You don't wash that kind of money by walking into a bank branch with a duffel bag.
No.
It requires fragmenting the money into thousands of microtransactions, moving it through global digital networks, shell companies in different jurisdictions, layered cryptocurrency wallets, dummy corporations.
It's like trying to find a specific grain of sand on a massive beach, but the beach is constantly shifting.
Precisely. And human analysts simply cannot sift through a global digital haystack of that magnitude. It is mathematically impossible.
Right.
So AI acts as this massive, hyper-intelligent magnet dragging over that haystack. It is deployed to spot the microscopic anomalous financial patterns, to track encrypted communications metadata, and to find the hidden digital link between a dummy corporation registered in the Caribbean and a motorcycle gang clubhouse in Sydney.
Wow.
The ministers at this summit, including U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security Mark Wayne Mullen and UK Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood, were deeply focused on this dual reality. AI is accelerating the capacity of criminals to cause harm, but it is simultaneously the only tool powerful enough to counter them.
And what's wild is that while they're building this massive digital net in the cloud, they are aggressively hardening the physical reality on the ground.
Right.
The Straits Times report didn't just talk about algorithms. It highlighted that Australia is deploying new fleets of aerial and maritime drones specifically to surveil the remote northern coastline.
Yeah, physical borders still matter.
Exactly. And the report also provides the domestic political context driving this. It explicitly mentions Australia's long-standing, very strict policies of intercepting and deporting asylum seekers arriving by boat to the Pacific island of Nauru.
Mm-hmm.
And it notes this is happening amid a resurgence in opinion polls for the anti-immigration One Nation Party. So you have this fascinating dynamic where the state is tightening the physical borders with drones and deportations, while simultaneously erasing borders digitally to hunt criminals globally.
It is a comprehensive, omnidirectional hardening of the national perimeter. But here's the critical friction point. As that digital perimeter expands, as Australian law enforcement reaches into the Middle East and uses AI to scrape and share massive, unfathomable data sets with foreign governments, it forces a very uncomfortable conversation about human consequences.
Right. Because if we are trusting an AI to flag transnational targets, and we are automatically sharing that intelligence with a global network of foreign governments, we lose control over what happens next.
Exactly.
What stops a digital glitch or just a ruthless foreign partner from using our intelligence to send an innocent person to a black site?
Right.
That brings us to our next source, which is essentially the internal rulebook for this exact nightmare scenario. It's Australian Federal Police National Guideline on offshore situations involving potential torture or cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment.
Which is an alphabet soup, usually abbreviated as TCIDDP.
Right.
This document is where the abstract theory of international policing collides with brutal reality. It's easy for politicians to stand at a podium and declare, we are cooperating globally to stop crime. It is another thing entirely to navigate the daily reality that different partner nations have vastly different judicial systems, and in some cases, horrific human rights records. This AFP guideline strictly governs police-to-police assistance when there are reasonable grounds to believe that sharing a piece of intelligence might put a person in danger of torture or cruel treatment.
Let's ground this.
Yeah.
What does this actually look like for the AFP officer sitting at a desk looking at a file they just got from a Five Eyes AI sweep?
So the guideline forces that officer to categorize the risk into 3 tiers: low, medium, and high risk.
Okay.
Low risk usually applies to early stage investigations where facts are scarce and the intelligence isn't pointing to a specific individual yet.
Okay, that makes sense.
Then you have medium risk. This is where sharing the information might lead to the identification of an offender in a jurisdiction where judicial corporal punishment, like caning, is a possibility.
Oof.
And then high risk is the absolute red zone. This involves releasing significant, damning information that is highly likely to lead to the detention of a person, where judicial corporal punishment is the standard sentencing option, or where there are reasonable grounds to believe they will be subjected to outright torture.
Wait, if the AFP knows a suspect will likely be tortured if they share the intel, how do they ever justify hitting send on that email?
It's a huge issue.
That sounds like direct complicity in a human rights abuse. Can a single officer just make that call?
No single officer can make that call. The guideline mandates that anything involving these risks must be elevated to a body called the Sensitive Investigations Oversight Board, the SIO.
The SIO, okay.
They are essentially a high-stakes ethics committee within the police force, and the decision ultimately requires the sign-off of a relevant deputy commissioner.
Right.
Furthermore, if the SIOB does authorize the sharing of this intelligence, they are legally required to apply caveats.
Caveats, like a warning label.
Think of it more like a legal self-destruct sequence or a strict contractual watermark. A caveat dictates that the intelligence originates solely from the AFP, it can only be used for the specific purpose requested, and most critically, it absolutely cannot be disclosed to any third-party agency or used in a court proceeding without the AFP providing prior written consent.
Okay, I see the bureaucratic protection there, but let's play this out in the real world.
Sure.
Let's say the AFP uses these new AI tools and they uncover actionable, rock-solid intelligence on a major transnational drug lord moving heroin into Sydney.
Okay.
But this drug lord is currently operating out of a country notorious for widespread human rights abuses and torture in his prison system. Does the SIE just sit on the intelligence? Do they let the drugs keep flowing into Australian streets simply because the destination country has a bad human rights record? It feels like an impossible catch-22.
It is an incredibly heavy burden, and the guideline provides a highly structured framework for navigating that exact catch-22. The rulebook states that even high-risk information can, under exceptional circumstances, be released.
Really?
Yes. An authorized delegate can approve it if they determine the release is strictly necessary to prevent a serious, immediate offense to a person, to protect the life of an undercover agent, or to prevent significant, widespread harm to society.
So they are actively weighing the human rights of the suspect against the potential harm to the general public.
Exactly. It is a profound utilitarian calculus.
Right.
And the variables the AFP must weigh are fascinating. Before they authorize release, they have to analyze the foreign country's historical pattern of human rights conduct.
Okay.
They check if the country is a signatory to the UN Convention Against Torture. But they also have to look at the granular specifics of the individual suspect. What is their age? Are they a vulnerable 19-year-old mule or a 50-year-old cartel boss?
Wow, so is that specific?
It has to be. They ask, is there an equivalent offense under Australian law, or is this country trying to prosecute someone for a political crime we don't even recognize? And the ultimate variable, what is the catastrophic risk to potential victims if the AFP chooses not to share this data?
I'm picturing the room where the SIO makes these decisions, and it has to be incredibly tense.
Oh, absolutely.
But this raises a glaring issue. When a domestic police force is making these localized life-or-death decisions entirely behind closed doors, using opaque intelligence, well, how do we know they're getting the balance right?
Right. Who watches the watchers?
Exactly. Who polices the police when they are operating in international shadows?
That is precisely why our next source exists. It is the foundational mandate of the Inspector General of Intelligence and Security, commonly known as the IGS. This is the independent oversight mechanism purpose-built to ensure these agencies don't cross the line.
Let's break down who the IGS actually watches, because the intelligence apparatus is massive.
It is.
The IGS is tasked with overseeing the 10 agencies that make up the national intelligence community. To avoid drowning in alphabet soup, we're talking about the domestic spies at ASIO, the overseas intelligence gatherers at ASIS, the massive cyber and signals intelligence apparatus at the Australian Signals Directorate, and the intelligence gathering arms of the AFP and the Department of Home Affairs.
The mandate of the IGS is highly specific. They are not there to judge if a spy mission was successful. They are there to scrutinize legality, propriety, and absolute consistency with human rights.
Okay.
Their job is to ensure that when the AFP or ASIS operates, they are strictly adhering to the ethical guidelines, like the torture risk assessments we just discussed.
What stands out in the source material is the fierce, almost aggressive independence of the IGS. They aren't a department buried within an intelligence agency. The IGS is an independent statutory office holder.
Yeah, that's crucial.
They have their own funding, their own cleared staff, and crucially, they cannot be directed by the Attorney General or any other politician on how they carry out their responsibilities.
That structural independence is everything. If a minister wants to quietly bury a problematic covert operation because it's politically embarrassing, they legally cannot order the IGS to look the other way.
Wow.
Even more powerfully, the IGS has the authority to initiate own motion inquiries.
Own motion inquiries?
Yes, meaning they do not have to sit around waiting for a politician to ask them to investigate a scandal. If the IGS sees a red flag in how the AFP is applying its AI data sharing caveats, they can launch a full-scale investigation entirely on their own authority.
So they aren't just mall cops waiting for the store manager to call them. They are more like health inspectors who have the universal key and can kick open the kitchen doors unannounced at 3 a.m. to see how the sausage is really made.
That is a very apt way to visualize their authority. They have extraordinary powers to compel documents and require intelligence officers to answer questions under oath.
Okay, so we've mapped out this incredibly robust system for the covert world. We have AI scraping the data, we have strict flowcharts for how that data is shared globally, and we have an independent watchdog ready to kick the doors in if the rules are broken.
Right.
But a nation's security isn't just about covert operations in the shadows. It is also about overt, brightly lit diplomacy. It's about the treaties you sign in public. And that brings us to the next massive piece of the puzzle. Australia's immediate neighborhood, specifically Indonesia.
Repeating from the covert shadows to the overt stage of regional geopolitics introduces an entirely different kind of complexity. Australia's relationship with Indonesia, its closest major neighbor, is historically intricate, and a brand new security treaty has just added a fresh layer of variables.
We are looking at a detailed analysis from Asia Link at the University of Melbourne regarding the February 6, 2026 Australia-Indonesia Security Treaty. This new agreement is designed to upgrade the older 2006 Lombok Treaty. What jumps out immediately is how it broadens the scope of their cooperation. They are no longer just talking about border patrols. The treaty explicitly targets what they call hybrid threats.
And this directly mirrors the evolution we saw at the Five Eyes Summit.
Right.
The 2026 treaty acknowledges a grim reality. Modern state-level threats rarely involve tanks rolling across a border anymore. Hybrid threats operate below the threshold of traditional war.
Okay, like what?
We are talking about crippling cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, targeted state-sponsored disinformation campaigns designed to swing elections, and economic coercion, like, suddenly banning the import of a country's key exports to force a political concession.
That's it.
As the author of the Asia Link piece, Johanna Suleiman, astutely points out, as the great power competition between the U.S. and China intensifies, middle powers in the region are increasingly vulnerable to these sub-threshold hybrid attacks.
But while the treaty identifies the right modern threats, the AsiaLink analysis highlights a massive, glaring complication in the text itself. The entire treaty relies heavily on a specific phrase: mutually beneficial security activities.
That phrase is a masterpiece of engineered diplomatic ambiguity.
It really is. Because on paper, it sounds great. It allows for robust cooperation on things everyone agrees on, like disaster relief or search and rescue operations.
Sure.
But crucially, it does not legally obligate Indonesia to assist Australia militarily in a genuine crisis. For example, if a major regional conflict broke out and Australia desperately needed to move naval vessels through Indonesian archipelagic waters, Indonesia is not bound by this treaty to grant that passage if they decide it isn't mutually beneficial at that specific moment.
You're seeing the core problem with the architecture?
It sounds like signing a lease with a roommate who legally has the right to change the locks on the front door whenever they feel like it. You're legally bound to each other, you share the neighborhood, but you never quite know what you're going to face when you try to walk inside, especially depending on who happens to be in charge that day.
And the current leadership is the absolute wild card in this scenario. The analysis spends a significant amount of time delving into the nature of Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto.
Yeah, let's talk about him.
He is a leader who has actively demonstrated a willingness to tear up historical precedents in Indonesian foreign policy.
The examples the analysis gives are pretty wild. Prabowo recently maneuvered Indonesia to join the BRICS economic bloc.
Right.
For context, BRICS is heavily dominated by China and includes nations like Russia and Iran. That is a major pivot.
It is.
Even more significantly, he signed a joint statement with China in 2024 that implicitly acknowledged China's 9-line claims in the South China Sea.
We have to pause on that because acknowledging the 9-line is a massive geopolitical earthquake.
Really? How so?
For decades, Indonesia's strict, unwavering policy was to outright deny that there were any overlapping maritime claims with China in that region. By implicitly acknowledging it, Prabowo upended a cornerstone of ASEAN's strategy.
Wow.
It forces policymakers in Canberra to ask a very blunt question. Under Prabowo's leadership, is Indonesia drifting fundamentally closer to Beijing's orbit?
And he's not just engaging with China. He also accepted an invitation to join U.S. President Donald Trump's Board of Peace to address the Israel-Palestinian conflict.
Yeah.
But that move triggered such intense domestic backlash within Indonesia that he essentially had to backtrack, publicly stating he would pull out if the board didn't deliver tangible benefits quickly. It paints a picture of a leader who is hyper-pragmatic, totally unpredictable, and willing to make impulsive moves that shock both his allies and his own citizens.
Underlying all of this high-level, unpredictable maneuvering is a persistent, deep-seated trust deficit between the two nations. The AsiaLink piece bluntly points out that the vast majority of Indonesians do not view Australia as their closest ally. And there are deep historical wounds that haven't fully healed, specifically regarding Australia's aggressive interventionist role during the 1999 East Timor independence referendum.
Right.
The relationship is certainly better than it was in the late 90s, but it remains far from a rock-solid, unquestioning alliance.
So this is the puzzle. If your top-level treaties are full of ambiguous loopholes, and the leader of the country is a strategic wildcard, how does a middle power like Australia actually secure its immediate neighborhood? You can't rely purely on a piece of paper that says mutually beneficial.
No, you can't.
How do you build trust when the hard power agreements are squishy?
You build it from the ground up, using highly targeted soft power. And you evaluate the success of that soft power ruthlessly.
Okay.
This brings us to our source from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. DFACE 2023 Annual Development Evaluation Plan.
I found this document fascinating because it shows the actual grinding machinery of soft power in action. Australia doesn't just sign a treaty with Prabowo and hope for the best.
Right.
They invest hundreds of millions of dollars into regional development, and they send independent evaluators to measure if that money is actually buying stability.
The scope outlined in the plan is telling. In 2023 alone, DFAT scheduled around 40 independent, rigorous evaluations of their development programs globally.
Yeah.
Of those 40, 15 were concentrated specifically in Southeast Asia. And when you look at the exact programs they're evaluating in Indonesia, they have absolutely nothing to do with military hardware. They are deeply rooted in the grassroots economy.
They evaluated a program called PRISMA 2, which is the Australia-Indonesia Partnership for Promoting Rural Incomes through Support for Markets in Agriculture. They also evaluated SI Siaga, which is a massive partnership focused on disaster risk management. So while the defense ministers are in a boardroom arguing over cyber threats, DFAT evaluators are out in rural Indonesian villages, figuring out if Australian funding actually helped local farmers get a better yield, or if it helped a local mayor prepare an earthquake evacuation plan.
Take a step further and look at the strategic mechanism at play here. Why does a defense strategy care about rural crop yields?
Right.
It's a dual-track approach to national security. The treaties operate at the volatile, unpredictable top level of government, subject to the whims of whoever holds the presidency.
Like Probo.
Exactly. But these development programs operate at the foundational grassroots level. They are designed to build crucial, stable confidence among the broader population.
It's essentially a diplomatic insurance policy written in fertilizer and disaster relief tense.
Exactly that. By funding local farmers and building disaster resilience, DAF is buying grassroots goodwill.
Right.
If an unpredictable leader like Probo decides to make an aggressive, anti-Australian pivot on the global stage, he suddenly has to answer to rural constituents whose livelihoods have been demonstrably improved by Australian agricultural grants.
Ah, I see.
It creates a powerful domestic buffer within Indonesia that stabilizes the relationship against top-level political shocks.
Okay, I love that. We've looked at how we police the globe covertly with AI, and we've looked at how we tried to stabilize our immediate neighborhood overtly through a mix of ambiguous treaties and grassroots agriculture. But here is the reality of being a middle tower. When your regional treaties are ambiguous, you inevitably look for an anchor. You look for a traditional, highly trusted partner to guarantee your long-term survival. For Australia, that means looking to the exact opposite side of the planet. Let's transition to the United Kingdom.
Moving from the complex nuances of the immediate neighborhood to a foundational, historical partner.
Yeah.
For this, we are drawing on a comprehensive report from the ANU National Security College regarding the recently revitalized Australia-UK Indo-Pacific agenda.
What becomes immediately clear when you read this report is that Canberra and London are operating from the exact same geopolitical playbook. Both nations have arrived at a shared, fundamental assessment that they are facing severe, systemic competition from authoritarian powers.
And the report specifically points to the strategic alignment between the UK's 2021 Integrated Review and Australia's 2020 Defence Strategic Update. Both of those foundational documents highlight a rapid deterioration of the global strategic environment.
Yeah, it's pretty grim.
They attribute this heavily to China's increasing use of coercive power in the Indo-Pacific, while also formally acknowledging Russia as an acute systemic threat to global stability. The shared conclusion is that simply trying to maintain the old status quo is no longer an option. Middle powers have to proactively and aggressively shape the security environment to survive.
And this is where my brain kind of short-circuits.
How so?
Well, we are taking this deeply historic Old World alliance built on the legacy of empire, shared language, and identical legal systems, and we are trying to retrofit it to handle 21st century cyber threats in the Indo-Pacific.
Right.
But I have to challenge the logic here. Are we at risk of deluding ourselves by over-relying on a partner that is literally a 20-hour flight away?
It's a fair question.
I mean, the UK is currently dealing with a massive land war in its own backyard in Europe. How does London actually project meaningful physical power into the Indo-Pacific?
It is the most common and valid logistical critique of the alliance. But the ANU report is very careful to detail the UK's concrete physical commitments to the region.
Okay, like what?
They emphasize that this isn't just diplomatic rhetoric, it is steel in the water. The UK has already deployed a formidable carrier strike group to the Indo-Pacific.
Wow.
They are in the process of establishing a littoral response group, which is a highly agile amphibious force in the region. And they have committed to keeping 2 offshore patrol vessels permanently roaming the Indo-Pacific for the next 5 years, with advanced Type 31 frigates scheduled to follow later in the decade.
So they are genuinely committing hardware.
They are.
And it's not just about ships passing through on patrol. The report outlines a deep level of integrated policy and physical access. They are proposing radically expanding access to each other's sovereign military bases.
Yeah, the basing is key.
The most high-profile example of this is the plan to have UK Astute-class nuclear-powered submarines regularly visiting and operating out of HMAS Sterling in Western Australia. This is, of course, a foundational pillar of the massive OUK's partnership that also includes the U.S.
But the integration goes far beyond traditional naval assets.
Right.
The report details proposals for a space bridge agreement to jointly develop and protect space-based technology and satellite communications.
A space bridge, wow.
And even more innovatively, they propose the creation of a joint futures cell.
I want to dig into that because Joint Future Cell sounds like something out of a sci-fi novel. What does it actually do?
It would act as a dedicated, integrated intelligence unit where analysts from both nations merge their brainpower to forecast long-term emerging risks.
So like a think tank.
More operational than that. They wouldn't just be counting foreign missiles. The Joint Future Cell would be tasked with modeling the cascading security impacts of climate change, tracking shifts in global supply chains, and wargaming-specific complex contingencies, such as a crisis involving Taiwan.
Oh, I see.
It is about anticipating the threat landscape a decade before it materializes.
But reading through the report, it's not just a celebration of the alliance. There is a very stark warning about the diplomatic strategy required to pull this off. The authors warn explicitly against Australia and the UK viewing the region through an exclusive Anglo-Australian prism.
This is perhaps the most crucial diplomatic insight in the report.
Really? Why?
Because if Australia and the UK stomp around the Indo-Pacific, acting like it is an exclusive old boys club, they will instantly alienate the very regional partners they are trying to empower and protect.
Oh, that makes sense.
The report stresses that this partnership requires a highly delicate diplomatic dance.
Right. They had to proactively engage with France and the broader European Union. And this is particularly sensitive for Australia because, the entire UK's nuclear submarine deal famously kicked off when Australia abruptly tore up a massive multi-billion-dollar conventional submarine contract with France.
It was a huge mess.
It caused a historic diplomatic rift. So, while integrating with the UK, Australia has to actively mend those European fences to ensure the West remains broadly unified.
Furthermore, the report emphasizes that London and Canberra cannot just focus inwardly on their own military interoperability. They must jointly focus their resources on building up specific regional partners.
Okay, who are they looking at?
The authors identify India, Malaysia, the Philippines, and Brunei as key states where coordinated joint UK-Australia assistance could be highly effective.
So the goal isn't to impose some sort of Anglo-American worldview on Southeast Asia. The goal is to help these nations build their own sovereign capacity to resist coercion.
Precisely. That might look like the UK and Australia jointly providing advanced cyber defense training to the government in the Philippines to protect their power grid, or providing maritime surveillance technology to Malaysia so they can police their own territorial waters against illegal fishing fleets.
Right.
It's about building a resilient network, not an empire.
So when we pull all of these disparate threads together, we started this whole conversation by talking about how the simple map with a red border is completely obsolete. And I think we've proven that Australia's security is no longer just about guarding a physical coastline.
It hasn't been about just the coastline for a very long time. It is a deeply interconnected, almost incomprehensible web.
It is a web where security means extraditing motorcycle gang members who thought they were safe in luxury apartments in Dubai. It means deploying artificial intelligence in tandem with the Five Eyes to track millions of dollars in laundered drug money hidden in digital haystacks.
Yeah.
It means enforcing incredibly strict, high-stakes human rights guidelines via the IGIs so we don't accidentally send a suspect to a torture chamber when we share that AI data.
Exactly.
It means navigating the completely unpredictable diplomacy of Indonesia's President Prabowo by methodically evaluating soft power agriculture programs in rural villages. And it means anchoring all of this anxiety by building nuclear submarine bases with the UK. It is overwhelmingly vast.
And if you are listening to this and wondering why you should care about this vast bureaucratic web, I want you to think back to the nature of those hybrid threats we discussed.
Yeah, the sub-threshold stuff.
Right. We do not live in an era where national security simply means protecting a border against an invading army. The security of your personal bank data, the stability of the national economy you rely on against foreign coercion, the integrity of the democratic institutions you vote in against disinformation campaigns, and yes, your physical safety from the violence of transnational crime, all of it relies entirely on this invisible, highly complex machinery of international diplomacy, technological integration, and ethical oversight holding together.
Everything is connected. The decisions a minister makes in a closed door, Five Eyes meeting about AI algorithms, directly impact the safety of the streets in Sydney. And the funding DHEF provides for a disaster relief tent in Indonesia directly impacts the geopolitical stability of our entire hemisphere.
That intense interconnectedness brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with.
Okay, let's hear it.
We have talked a lot today about the focus on critical technologies and data standards in these source materials. Both the Five Eyes Alliance and the Australia-UK partnership are actively trying to write the international rulebook for artificial intelligence and global data governance.
Right.
They are desperate to ensure that authoritarian models of technology don't gain the upper hand globally.
It's a quiet war over who gets to write the foundational code of the internet for the next century.
Exactly. So if the real future of conflict is going to be fought sub-threshold via algorithms, economic coercion, disinformation, and massive cyber disruption, our massive multi-decade, multi-billion-dollar physical projects like building a fleet of nuclear-powered submarines or relying on traditional state-to-state security treaties, are they already becoming the battleships of the 21st century?
Wow. By battleships, you mean they're incredibly impressive pieces of engineering, hugely intimidating and vastly expensive, but perhaps fundamentally outpaced and rendered obsolete by the sheer speed of digital statecraft.
It is a question worth agonizing over as we watch this web evolve. Are we bankrupting ourselves to build the ultimate weapons for a war that has already moved to a completely different digital domain?
That is a fascinating, slightly terrifying question to end on, because it takes us right back to our original problem. We spent all this time trying to map out the complex borders of modern security, only to realize the map isn't just murky. We might actually be looking at the wrong map entirely.